Welcome to the happiest hour live, everyone. Where no matter where you are right now, if things are wonderful or if things are challenging, every week we strive to help you make life just a bit better. My name is Dan Lerner.
I am Dr. Schlechter.
And together, over the past 8 years, we have taught the science of happiness to over 6,000 students at New York University. Now, when we began this show about 8 weeks ago, with the generous support of the Krame Center for Mindful Living, it was specifically to bring experts to folks who had questions, experts in hope, experts in mindfulness, meaning, and other topics that were and are pertinent to our well-being and particularly challenging in today's world. So, in that spirit, we've always kicked off the show by emphasizing that this show is about you. It's why we encourage you to get involved, to ask questions throughout, to make this hour what you need it to be. And today's show may be more in that spirit than anyone that came before it. For as we bring this series to a close, it was always meant to be an 8-part series, and we'll touch on that later. It's right in the middle of the world reopening. We started when things were completely locked down for many of us. And now, for many of us, we are beginning to emerge. And as a result, we have questions. They might be similar to what we asked before, and they might be quite different. But every single one of us will have questions. What's safe now? How am I supposed to emerge in a way that is okay for myself, for my family, for my friends? Maybe how do I talk about this with my kids? And for today, and I think for most of us, how does science inform the questions, all of the questions that we're asking about our well-being as we begin to emerge again? So as we've always strived to have the experts at the right time for you, we think that today we have the right expert to answer this question about science and well-being as we begin to reemerge. I met Dr. Dan Riskin at a conference a few years ago, and we had the best conversation. In fact, every time I talk to him, I just have the most wonderful time. And I remember the conversation. It had nothing to do with either of our areas of expertise. We sat at an outdoor bar having beers, talking about our kids, talking about music, which both of us love. The fact that he's an expert in bats never came up once. And when I learned that he had written a book titled Mother Nature is Trying to Kill You, I kind of figured that our professional lives would never cross. I'm in well-being. He's writing about things that are trying to kill you. But his passion for every topic that arose made it really clear to me that we were going to be friends. And we are. And he's wonderful. And I am grateful for that friendship. But it's his expertise that brings him here today at just the right time. See, while Dan's fascination with science began with bats, he has studied them in almost 20 countries, and he'll be featured actually this coming Sunday, if I have the date correct, on CNN with Anderson Cooper. His passion has expanded to understanding and really explaining topics that are all over the map with science, ranging from bed bugs to viruses to parasites. In fact, that passion for science is so magnetic, as you'll find out shortly, and wonderful that he has now spent over a decade sharing it on shows such as Monsters Inside Me, as the host of Daily Planet, on the Discovery Channel in Canada, and even on The Late Show with Jay Leno. He spent the past several months on Canadian radio as well, updating the public on coronavirus. And he joins us directly, as in about 10 minutes ago, from his perch as a TV host covering the SpaceX launch for Canadian News Channel, which, as you may know, has been delayed. So here's the thing about Dan. He makes science more interesting and relatable than pretty much anyone I know. So today, get your questions ready. The questions that are really burning for you, the questions that you want to know about what's happening in the world right now as you reemerge. You know what? Call your kids into the room because he's fascinating. Have them watch, have them share. But all together, let's welcome the wonderful Dr. Dan Riskin.
How you doing, Dan? Good to see you.
Great, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's always nice to hear nice things about yourself. That's a great way to come into a conversation. So you're very kind, and I do remember that conversation very well, and it was a lot of fun. And I think what we do have in common is that passion. It seemed like any time the conversation took a turn, we were both champing at the bit to push it forward. And so let's do it again.
All right, perfect. I look forward to that. Wonderful. Now, look, I talked to Dan about this, and everyone here who's been to the show knows this already. We always like to start with a question for you, so we really get a sense of how we can make this show yours as an audience. That is. So the question today is, what are some science questions that you would most like to have answered right now? And take a moment if you want to go ahead and throw them in the chat box so we can get a sense both of themes that are coming up, but also so we can make sure to really touch on your questions and address them today. Let's see. I can put it in there too. Here we are. There it is. What is so different about the virus? And Dan, feel free to
Sure.
What you're seeing there.
Yeah, well, let's start there. What's so different about the virus? Well, a lot of people remember SARS from 17 years ago, and that seemed to really do a number on the lower respiratory tract. And this one seems to be working the entire respiratory tract. And so it behaves a little bit differently in terms of where it goes inside the body, how much it sets up shop, and then how much fluid ends up accumulating in your lungs, and also how much it spreads. So if you look at MERS, which is another coronavirus, that stays way deep down in your lungs. So it makes you very sick. It can kill you much more effectively than COVID-19 can, but you don't spread it because it's so far down in your lungs. This one seems to live all through your respiratory tract. So not only does it make you super sick, but it can also spread very easily. And, one of the things we've learned about this that makes it so scary is that it can spread before you have symptoms. And more than half the cases that are showing up seem to have been spread that way.
All right. Now, this is an interesting thing. Dan, you cover so many different areas of science, and you basically had to dive into this one quite recently, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So my background is bats, and so this virus comes from bats, so that gives me a little bit of a foot in. But so what I've been doing for about the past year is making myself available to different news stations, mostly in Canada, as a science generalist. And so if they have a question about this rocket launch for today, or if they've got a question about this weird hornet that showed up in Washington State that's terrifying looking, how worried should we be? Then I know how to look things up. I know how to read up on it. I can I can integrate it into other things that I've already learned, and then I can communicate it effectively. And often that communication is just a matter of what we were talking about, Dan, which is what is interesting about this? Where do you get fired up? Where do you get stoked about this? And with the coronavirus, it hits a lot of people in a scary way, but there are a lot of very empowering things that are happening as well. And there are a lot of silver linings. And I know that seems trite, but the fact that for the most part, this doesn't affect kids as much as it affects the elderly. As a parent, I take that as a real, thank you, that there was nothing that made the virus have to work this way. And then the other thing is that, just the mortality rate is much lower than it would be for, say, the flu of 1918 and things like that. So, there's a lot to be thankful about. So I feel like learning as much as I can has been one way that I've been able to feel a sense of, not control, but just sanity, maybe is the word I'm looking for.
Right, got it. And yet, when we were talking about it, you mentioned that as a researcher studying something, say murder hornets, which are, I don't know enough about them, they're sort of in one state and they're starting to be a concern, as opposed to something like this, which is all around us, affects you as a human being too, right?
Yeah, what's funny is, as you said that, I'm in my attic, in Toronto, a hornet flew up to my window and was like, I see you, and then it flew away. As you said that, I was like, they're here. They're not here. But the murder hornets, they are fascinating. And it's, you tease my book, which is called Mother Nature's Trying to Kill You. I love the dark side of nature. I love the venoms. I love the weird things animals do that you shouldn't talk about at the dinner table. And so that dark side, I think, is really attractive about nature. I think it gives it a lot of charisma. Maybe that's part of what I like about bats, is that you have to get to know them before you really understand what makes them so special. But once you do, they really win you over. And it's a little bit like Kramer on Seinfeld. At first impression, he's a bit, standoffish, but then you love him, right? So bats, I guess, are the Kramers of the mammal world. There's some science communication for you in action. Look at me putting it in terms that people in New York will understand. But yeah, so when the murder hornets came out, that had people's attention. And so the challenge is always, how do I take this and make it an entry point to curiosity and science? Because science, for a long time, has been this walled off thing that only Carl Sagan had the keys to, or Bill Nye, or Neil deGrasse Tyson. And if you weren't one of those people, or you weren't talking to one of those people, you were not part of the conversation. And now it's on Twitter, it's all over the place. That means it's watered down. That means there are a lot of bad sources in there. but the conversation's really changed. And so whenever I have an opportunity like a murder hornet infection or an infestation in Washington state, I jump on it because I think there's maybe a kid listening to the radio right now who might get turned on, or there's maybe a grown-up who, oh yeah, maybe that's going to make me think differently about, wasps in general. So it's always fun to look for those boosts of adrenaline that you can jump on.
All right. We brought up the murder wasps. Let's just settle this, because there were a lot of people on the call who weren't even worried about murder wasps minutes ago. And now they're all like Googling myrtle wasps. And they're like, oh, I wasn't worried about that. What's the word on murder wasps?
Yeah, you're good to let's put it to rest. So in Asia, there is a wasp. It's a big wasp. And sometimes with nature, something that looks big and scary isn't actually that harmful. Like tarantulas look really terrible, but they're not that venomous. Like if you see a tarantula, not a big deal. And sometimes something that looks totally innocuous is actually quite bad. This is a case where something looks terrible, and it is terrible. It is awful. I mean, these things have an awful sting. Terribly poisonous venom, terribly painful venom is the word I was looking for. And they can attack in mass. And what they'll do is they'll fly into they'll find a beehive, and they'll attack. They'll chomp the heads off of the bees with their giant mandibles. They'll carry the bee carcasses back to their hive and feed them to their young. So they're bad. And when people disturb the nest, sometimes they can get attacked. And every year in different parts of Asia, China, Japan, a couple of people are actually killed by these things. But they are restricted to Asia, and they aren't all over the place. And when I say a couple people die every year, a couple people die from, dogs biting them every year. It's really a rare thing, and it's not something that people in Asia generally have to worry about. But a couple of these things turned up in Canada on the West Coast last year, and a couple have turned up this year in Washington State. And people are worried that maybe they're going to get a foothold. And if so, what's that going to mean? This isn't the kind of species that could take over all of North America and fly away with our children and like flying monkeys from the Wizard of Oz. They're probably, if anything, going to establish in a small area in the Pacific Northwest, but as far as we can tell right now, they haven't even done that. It looks like a couple that made it over, but were quickly killed by insect people, and now they are not established. So for now, don't worry about it. But I said that about the COVID-19, right? Early reports were that they had it under control, and I remember saying, so don't worry about it. And here we are.
You and I actually had breakfast, didn't we? Like at some point in like late January, early February, and you're like, and you emailed me 2 weeks later. Actually, I take that back.
No, Dan, I said the same thing, because it's become really tricky. Our news establishment has to sell. And the way they sell is often by ratcheting up the fever. And so most of the time when I see things, I think that's probably not going to be as big as they're saying. And I thought, okay, there's a possibility we'll have to be careful for a while. But at the beginning, I really was very much, I don't want to say nonchalant, but I was like, I think we're exaggerating our response to this. And I quickly, and I think this is part of the conversation today, was I quickly changed my tune. I quickly had to. And I never called it a hoax, unlike some other people. But I was, part of being a good scientist is being open to new data.
What new data do you stay open to? Right? I mean, given that, because we get so much data. I mean, Dan, your expertise is in that. How do I find kind of the right data? And we can tune into Dan Riskin and go, oh, Dan Riskin is the source I trust. How do we decide what's trustworthy out there?
Yeah, what's been neat is how the messages that have been coming from the trusted sources have been changing. And it's not because they aren't trustworthy, it's because their information's been changing. And so one of the things that I think has been such a learning moment for a lot of people is the way, say, masks or the possibility of pre-symptomatic spread. The official word early on was, don't worry, this doesn't spread until you have symptoms. It's just like SARS 17 years ago. And now that's clearly not the case. And then masks, don't wear them because they aren't going to protect you from getting the virus. Oh, but wait, they stop people from spreading the virus. Yes, no, do please put on masks. And so when people change what they're saying, it makes you think, well, who can I trust? I don't know, at least at least, certain sources, it doesn't matter if they're wrong, at least they're saying the same thing every single time. And so, yeah, that's part of what makes science sort of an uncomfortable place to go, is that you do have to be open to changing your mind. And this is something that I keep going back to with UFOs and Bigfoot and all this stuff. As a person who's a generalist in science, inevitably some news producer is like, hey, they found a Bigfoot in British Columbia. Can you talk to that? And I have to take the moment to say, okay, what's the evidence? Just let me check. Because if I don't do that, I'm not being a scientist anymore. And I mean, the problem, the potential issue is that you could spend your whole life looking for those exceptions to the rule and looking for that conspiracy. But you do have to have an open mind, and that's part of what makes science a little bit harder than being a dogmatist.
John Hearn just said something pretty wonderful. He said, that's why they call it practicing medicine. And I think that's such a wonderful statement, John. I use the word practice a lot. I always like to say, I never meditate. I only practice meditation because you can't do it. Like I feel like if I could truly just meditate, then I'd be like the Buddha or something. But I'm just practicing. It's something about keeping that beginner's mind. Somebody earlier said, what is science? They got back to it. And I think even what is science is, I think, up for questioning these days. I think we really need to go back to the roots of letting people know that there is and I'd be curious what your definition is, Dan, but a systematic way of shared development of knowledge is how I think. What if you had to say, what is science?
Yeah, I think the big thing I always harp on is that it's a process, and it's not a body of knowledge. It's a process. It's a way of evaluating new information and coming up with the thing you think is probably the least wrong and saying, we'll stick with that for now until we find out that we're wrong, and then we'll adjust as we go forward. And so that's one of the things about, when I think about your students and I think about people that are in school, one of the great sort of aha moments in my career has been, when I was in high school, I thought if I could just understand everything I need to know for grade 12, then I've done high school and I can kind of stop. And then I got into university and I was like, okay, well, let's just finish what I need for the courses. And when I'm finished university, I can stop learning because I know everything and I can get on with my life. And then they tricked me and I find myself just learning and learning and learning and learning. And at some point, you realize that uncomfortable feeling that you don't know quite what you're doing and you are on a steep learning curve and this is hard and I can't wait until I've got this mastered so I can move on to the next thing. That discomfort is actually where you want to be. That's an uncomfortable place, but it's a place where you're growing. And so the best education is one that makes you comfortable with that process of being on that slope. So in terms of science is about finding a way to continue learning new things. And I remember a night I was in Belize. I was catching bats with one of my mentors, one of my heroes, a guy named Brock. And we were standing next to the net. And he said, Dan, if you ever get bored doing science, you're doing it wrong, because you're never supposed to be asking the same question year after year. You're always supposed to be doing new things. And that's, to me, what the great thing about science is. And that just really stuck for me. And as someone who's moved from really specialized work on bat biomechanics and understanding how they fly and how they walk and the physics of all that stuff, to somebody who gets a text message, can you come on the news and talk about the SpaceX launch in 20 minutes? It's been really nice. I don't get bored. And that's one of the great things about science for me.
It's funny, Alan and I, the first class of every semester, we cite Dan Gilbert. By the way, I should say, I think we should all be lucky enough to have a mentor hero named Brock, just for the record. Although I think for many of us, I'll take Barack. That works for a lot of us too.
Sure.
Right now. I miss him so much.
He's still there. He's in the wings. It'll be okay.
So so we cite we talk about Dan Gilbert, and he kicks off his class, Psych 101 at Harvard, saying, "Look, 50% of everything I'm going to teach you this semester is wrong. I just don't know which half. So it's science, right? Which is a nice opening. So when our students go, "Oh, I'm skeptical about that," I'm like, "Good, wonderful. Let's be skeptical and talk about it because that's how we learn." Right? So.
Yeah, but there's an important difference between being skeptical, i.e., I'm going to think about this and I'm going to use my brain, versus, I don't trust smart people. Yes. And that's this weird phenomenon that has been on the rise for a little while now. And I don't know where it comes from, and I can't really understand it. I don't understand it. If anybody in the chat can offer some insight into this. Maybe people have been thinking about this in a different way from me, but I'm just baffled why you wouldn't trust. If I have a kidney disease, I want somebody who's studied kidneys their whole lives and is obsessed with kidneys and knows everything about kidneys and wrote a book about kidneys. And if I have a climate crisis, I want the people who study climate to tell me what we need to do. I want the expert in that field, and I trust the expert in that field. And so where does this come from, this distrust of experts and the feeling that they're not like us, that somehow people that make vaccines are different from parents, that they themselves aren't parents who would give their kids vaccines, that they're alien people that want to control the population? I don't get it. I don't get any of that. And that is something I'm fighting against. And I feel like I'm in that battle with a blindfold just swinging in the air.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Dan and I think experience this a lot in our classroom. We get to watch it to a certain extent, that there is a generational movement away from institutions, trusting institutions. It actually began quite literally with Nixon, and has been observed ever since. And I think there's also a cultural component to this. The Tuskegee experiments, the relationship of African American certain populations to medicine was permanently damaged by the sense that doctors for years were giving syphilis, an illness that we already knew about. The idea of the experiment was so stupid. And, I often think this is something of our own making as well. The thing I always think about, as my mother and my mother-in-law are both in education, is how we have been damaging our public education for so long. And the long-term effects of not elevating science. And there is a very strong movement in our country against science that has been working through our education systems. And we have other models in history for what happens when certain people take over the education system. It's actually a very powerful way it's like a long-term investment. And so it's tragic, but many of the people who are, I would say, they're not young people who are not trusting government right now. They're much older people. But what I'm saying isn't completely, it's not a complete answer, but.
No, but it's your thought about it, and it's helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate but I was gonna say, one of the things in education is we don't teach critical thinking like we used to, right? Yeah. You memorize something, you want to get the good grades because that's what matters right now. We want to get into a grad school or get the good job or whatever it might be. So it's not about, we want to take fewer risks, and that means less thinking, more memorization. And I think that's a real challenge too. So being able to challenge someone to think for themselves, that's huge. And when we're not doing that, we're not, as John brought up, practicing is a real challenge. John actually just made another really interesting comment, which he is prone to do. I know John quite well. I think you've already answered your own question. The sensation of being an expert or encountering one is that expertise is illusory. If we're experts, all we can see is our own ignorance. If we rely on experts, we're often disappointed by their imperfections and ignorance. Right? We look for certainty. And as, what is her name? Mindfulness. You know who I'm talking about here, Alan, from Harvard.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I can see her face. Anyway, she writes on mindfulness, researches mindfulness. She will say that people want certainty, and certainty is mindlessness, right? It means we're not thinking, right? And it's almost comforting. And yet, these are the issues that come with that, right? So
I think so much about how we develop this as kids. I've had two instances recently. I don't know if any of you have seen the classic film Turner and Hooch. This is a very important piece of cinematography done with Tom Hanks, where he is a police detective and he's paired up with a dog. And we watched it with my kids, and I am going to ruin the movie for people here, and Dan gets very upset with this. And my kids kept saying, "Is everything going to be okay with the dog?" And I, of course, kept saying, "Of course. It's called Turner and Hooch. What could happen to the dog? Nothing bad." Well, people, things don't turn out so well for Hooch.
Oh, God.
Great.
Hey,
Thanks
you
a lot,
just
Alan.
saved me. You just saved me. I would have watched that with my kids. I was like, oh, it's a great movie, Turner and Hooch. Let's put it on, kids. And then,
By the way,
thank you. I owe you.
there's a lot of scantily clad Tom Hanks in this movie. If anyone out there was looking for that, it's out there.
And Hooch
Can you
wears
see his
nothing.
Hooch?
Hooch wears nothing. Amazing. Yeah.
So Carl and my wife and I were shocked by the whole thing. When the dog has its tough moment in the film, my kids let out a piercing cry. And since that moment, every time we watch a movie, they go, does anybody die? And I go, I go, no, nobody dies. And they go, wait, are you sure? Should you check? And that one moment was so damaging, you know, for their trust of me as a resource in terms of who is going to live and die in films. And I think there's a very personal process that goes on in developing, I would say, trust in resources and in people around us. You know, I'm always supposed to try to go for the, you know, most evidence-based piece of research, the double-blind, randomized, controlled study. I almost always go to Glenn Hirsch, the director of clinical affairs he's at One Park at the Child Study Center at NYU. You know, I go to a source, I go to a person far quicker than go to other people. I truly trust Glenn Hirsch. And people keep saying, who do we know? Who do we trust? And when I require more than Glenn Hirsch, I go to Jess Shatkin or I go to someone else. You know, I have a variety of people I trust with different opinions. And I think I think in the future, developing multiple sources and multiple people we really trust is really helpful. It's really essential. Who do you go to? We know what.
Yeah.
Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I've got some Twitter feeds that sort of do different things for me, and if I hear certain people saying things about this rocket launch, I trust those people, and if I see other people saying something about periodical cicadas, I trust those people, but inevitably I'm sort of starting from scratch, and so for me, is it in a scientific paper that's been through peer review? And that's sort of my benchmark. So anytime there's some new thing, I always, you know, there might be a write-up in some newspaper or some website. I'm always like, give me a link to the study. Okay, good. And then I read the abstract of that study. And maybe that's where my science training comes in, is that I can quickly look at the abstract, look at the figures, get the gist of the paper, and then figure out what more I need to read to really understand it. And so that's where I end up going. But I hear you on having a couple sources that you really trust. That's just smart. The challenge, though, is different people who have different. How do you make sure you're not in your own silo of ignorance if you are looking for the person you trust? Because other people trust other people who say other things. And so what makes what you've done different from their methodology?
Yeah. I still go back to the question of, you know, what can people, where do people on this, in the audience right now, where do they go? How do they make that? How do they make up their mind in terms of what sources are trustworthy sources? Are there any kind of indicators? Is it that folks are willing to say, oh, I was wrong before, which one very prominent figure in this country doesn't? You know, are we willing to look for people who are willing to admit mistakes? You know, and what are the other markers that we should look for?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a good sign when you find out that you've changed your mind. I'm always refreshed when I realize, oh, I don't think that anymore. Now I see different evidence. The other thing that can be a good mark is if you see something and it doesn't quite fit right, then you're saying, well, that doesn't quite make sense. Like early on, you were telling me not to wear a mask, but you're saying we need to give masks to all the doctors. I don't understand those two sentences at the same time. They seem to conflict. What are you trying to tell me? And trying to do digging on that and use your brain. I think that's and I think a lot of people are, wait, I'm not the person who's supposed to be doing that thinking. I'm supposed to find the person who's figured that out. What's the answer? But in fact, with a quickly developing situation, if you're doing that thinking, you are the right person to be doing that thinking, and that's who you should trust. You should trust yourself first, and then trust whoever you're following on, you know, what director of this and that and the other thing, and then you know, somewhere down the list is me and other people that are commenting on science. I mean, I'm hoping to push people in the right direction. The nice thing though is that it can be really empowering to be curious about something that you're passionate about. And there's a study that I always talk about to anybody who will listen, where they looked at, learning and adrenaline. And basically what they did, and this is an iconic study, it was in Nature in 1993, what they did is they showed a slideshow to a group of people and then quizzed them about the slideshow. But some people heard a very boring slideshow, saw the same pictures. The other group saw the same pictures, but the slideshow was attached to an extremely sad story that elicited a ton of emotion. It was about a kid who, got hit by a car and all these things. And even though the pictures were the same and shown for the same amount of time, the people who heard the emotional story remembered it better. And I'm not saying they remembered the story better, they remembered the slides better. What color was that person's sweater on the third slide? What make of car was it in the seventh slide? They'd remember those details better if they heard the emotional story. But if you gave people beta blockers, drugs that block adrenaline, which prevents the emotions from binding to the brain. So when you have an emotional reaction, you release adrenaline into your blood and that activates your brain. If you take beta blockers, adrenaline can't do its job. So in the room, you hear the sad story, but your brain doesn't fire up the way it's supposed to. And so what this shows is that it's adrenaline that makes your brain work. In other words, the emotional experience of really caring about the thing you're learning about makes you better at learning about it. And so COVID-19 really matters because people are deeply, deeply affected by this, some in tragic ways, some in ways I can't even imagine. And everyone's different. But the fact that it matters to you means that when somebody tells you that the receptor it binds to is called ACE2, you have an ability to remember that you don't have if it's some disease in gerbils that once swept through East Africa in the 1840s. I mean, it's a different paradigm. So anyway, that's just something to think about, is that science also has this experiential component that really matters. And you're a better scientist, you're a better thinker when you are emotional. That dichotomy between Kirk and Spock is a false one. Kirk would have been a great scientist too.
Huh.
Wow, you are the first one to bring up a Star Trek reference.
Yeah, I'm surprised it took up this many episodes, but man, you did it really well.
I really appreciate that.
I'll never forget that one. My adrenaline was popping.
Yeah, there you go.
Emotions come up a lot, right? Emotions come up not only in the way that we remember things, but as you said, especially right now in the current environment, someone asked a great question before about redirecting the current noise around the virus to spark genuine, widespread scientific curiosity and conversation about it. There's a lot of emotion in the conversations we're having. It doesn't necessarily mean they're effective conversations. So how does emotion play into our ability to have, as Anna said, a curious and genuine? I'm going to sort of guess here, Anna, that it's sort of like a real give and take where we're listening, where we're able to learn from one another. How does that play?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things to talk about, right? I mean, there's the virus, and then that's sort of like there's the medical side of the virus. Then there's the epidemiological side of the virus, how it spreads, where it's going, who's most affected, what socioeconomic groups are affected. And then there's like the mental health side. I've been stuck in my apartment for weeks and weeks on end. I miss my friends. My kid is driving me insane. And then, but all these conversations are part of it. And so I think the real objective is to ask yourself, what am I optimizing? What do I want to talk about here? And so if you start with a conversation about COVID-19, that's everything. That everything is COVID-19 right now. And so nothing is COVID-19, right? So it's really about focusing in on what you want to know. And for me, talking about it in the news, that's been a big part of preparing, is to be really clear with the hosts beforehand. Okay, we're going to talk about COVID-19, but we're going to talk about this specific paper, or we're going to talk about this specific question or this worry. What is it exactly that we want to get at today? Because if it's the conversation about how you're just feeling and how you're anxious, that's a valid thing. And science is part of that too, but it's separate from the other topics.
Right.
Someone just brought up the idea of how would news be shared in an ideal world to allow us to make judgments and prevent this objectivity of information. What do you think? I have an idea, but Dan, what do you think? What would make the share of information better?
I think the sharing of information is pretty darn good right now. It's just the sharing of misinformation that gets in the way. What are your thoughts? I'm curious, because you started there. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, I think there's a real tension in sharing large public health information. Now, the example I always use is drinking alcohol during pregnancy, because we say don't drink when you're pregnant. But clearly, there are lots of people in the world who drink when they're pregnant and their children don't develop fetal alcohol syndrome. The problem is science doesn't know how much and when drinking during pregnancy causes fetal alcohol syndrome. We have an idea. We know that hard liquor is more likely. The highest incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome is in Eastern Europe. And we know that there's probably earlier on during the pregnancy is worse. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, would it be better to say to people, okay, so drink a little, not too much, we don't know, you know, and it could have to do with your metabolism, right? That culturally, different cultures around the world metabolize alcohol very differently. And so that's another thing, you know, well, you're this, you're that. So we just make a statement. We say, don't do this. And right now we're saying, wear a mask. And we were talking about this earlier, but I think a lot of people are like, yeah, but outside, you're pretty safe outside. And there's some truth to that. But for me, I'm wearing a mask when I'm outside because I want to create a culture of wearing a mask in New York City right now. Yeah. That we need that culture right now. Because if I'm outside, I'm going somewhere. And if I'm going to go into a bank or a store, I don't want to have to, you know, rustle up my mask. Then it's too late. I've gone inside. I haven't worn the mask. And I think, you know, there are parts of the United States where they are not having COVID. And they're saying, why do I have to do this? And I think that's really, it gets to a level of complexity that's very hard to explain in public health. You have to do it because you're patriotic, because we're all doing this, because the only way we're going to stop the spread of COVID. And so I think giving out this information is very, very complicated. I think, you know, Fauci, I look at him, by the way, he wanted to comfort people. He said, I hope we're going to have a vaccine in a year and a half. All the people I know who study vaccines say, I don't see how that's possible. Now, by the way, Dan, when I say that to you, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I've just listened to the people that make vaccines, and some of them are just too optimistic, and some of them are too pessimistic, and probably the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I mean, there are no vaccines for any coronaviruses right now, none. Right. But part of that is because there are so few of them, and we haven't really needed one as badly as we need one right now, so people haven't been working on it as hard. Okay, but some things we've never found a vaccine to. HIV, haven't got one. The fastest one ever, I think, was the mumps. It was 4 years for a vaccine for the mumps. And science has come a long way since then, so there's reason to be optimistic. But I think the question, what if we never have a vaccine, is one that terrifies people to the point that they don't even want to talk about it. But by answering that question, you also answer, what are we supposed to do for the next 3 years until one comes, or even if it is a year and a half? And so it gets to these, it's very tricky from a public health perspective. How do you create the conversation you want to have? So I live in Toronto. The epidemic in Toronto has been much, much quieter than in New York, thankfully for us and sadly for New York. But it's created this thing where people are like, my kids, they just want to play. Can't I just let them play in the street with the other kids? I mean, everybody's healthy. We all know we're healthy. Come on, it's going to be fine. And I'm seeing my neighbors do this, and my kids are like, they're all playing. Can I go play? And I'm like, no, you can't. You can't go play. You got to stay in the house with your boring parents and fight with your siblings more because you're so sick of each other, you want to kill each other. It's just really hard. And so how do you walk that line between fear and empowerment and hope? And that is a very, very tough line. And to a large extent, I don't know how well you can sort of pick your answer and then hit that dial. I don't know, in a certain way, it sort of just evolves by itself and the conversations happen on their own, and it depends on how those conversations go.
You know, and you bring up a couple different, kind of infinite array of scenarios, but bringing up the question of what we're discussing in this very moment on this show, but also having to turn, as soon as we turn the camera off, to go to our kids and say potentially, we should go outside. We can't. And really for both of you, I mean, Dan, as a parent and as a scientist and as someone who speaks to various populations, And Alan, as someone who specializes in adolescent psychiatry, how do you talk to kids about this in a way that both has a healthy dose of fear, because you need enough, but is not enough to be debilitating both now and into the future? I'm curious to know, for those of us who are parents, what do you do?
Alan, you take it. Go.
What? Dan, you're the guest on the show. Like,
but you're the expert. This is what I'm doing. Watch, everyone. Watch how I defer to an expert, learn from them, and then integrate what they're saying into my worldview. Watch.
I'm taking notes as we.
So really, when you're talking to kids, the first thing is, figuring out where they're at. You always start with the kid by like, what do you understand? What do you think is going on? Because then they will say the craziest you've ever heard. And you'll be like, oh my God, that was your understanding. It will be mind blowing. But and kids, most adolescents in particular, they tend to exaggerate risks. They have a heightened risk and reward belief. So they love reward. They love good things. They also think everything is much riskier than it is. So many of the adolescents I'm talking to, we're now opening up our clinic, and there are a couple I've wanted to come in, and they're like, if I leave the house, I'll probably die. I'm like, you're not going to die. But that being said, we're not forcing anybody to come into Bellevue. So trying to help them adjust the risks. A lot of my patients have asthma, and they were all saying, because it was a lung disease, they were all saying, people with asthma, anybody who gets asthma, they're going to die. And actually, we found out, for whatever reason, asthma is not as high a risk factor as other things, as being elderly or being significantly overweight, or even having diabetes or hypertension. It was below all of those. So trying to help them develop a healthier risk and reward assessment. So that idea of being like, going out will be a ton of fun. I get it. Those kids, those are actually the most fun kids in the whole world, right? Using a little humor. If you go out today, you will most likely have the greatest day of your life, which is why I'm going to keep you here with me. But I think, and then this is where we're all having to be really creative of saying, we're going to have to find something that balances the risks and rewards. And then, as Dan called me out last week, a couple times I've said, Dan wouldn't eat out right now. He wouldn't, take takeout food. I've had some takeout food because otherwise people in my family will kill me when I'm asleep.
Yeah.
It's really my own.
At least you'll be asleep.
Right.
Yeah. So ultimately, it's for your own self-preservation that you're ordering Chinese.
That's right.
Wonderful. All right. It's good to know.
Yeah. So I think it's finding out where they're at, realizing that most of the younger kids are horribly ill-informed. The adolescents exaggerate risk and reward, and then going from there to try to help them balance the risks and rewards realistically and create other things.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's helpful. I think what stuck to me there was this idea of starting by asking them what they already know. I think I miss that step when I'm talking to my kids a lot. So I appreciate that. Thank you for that. I think for me, what I've really, the first messaging that I had for my kids when I picked them up from school on what would be the last day of school of the year for them, unknowingly to us, was, okay, kids, we're about to go through a bit of a weird time, and you're safe. You're not gonna die from this, but old people are at risk. And so everything you're gonna do for the next couple weeks, I said couple weeks, not knowing, is for grandma. And so we're doing what we're doing to save people. And you guys, what you're doing is gonna save lives. And so you guys have a chance to be heroes here. And I go back to that messaging quite frequently. And it doesn't always work, but it does seem to at least push the conversation in a positive direction. So I may find out later that I've scarred them for life by doing that, but for now that's working for me.
Well, it's interesting too, because that's this knock-on effect of being able to teach kids what's meaningful, like their ability to contribute right now. Like Dan, when you and I were talking yesterday, you're saying, being immersed in something like this so deeply and so quickly it can have an effect on your well-being as someone who is constantly there, constantly thinking about it. You said you have like a daily 650 hit on a radio station. So you really need to be up to date and be able to present this in a creative way. It's always on your mind. And so it can be really challenging that way. But then you pivoted and you said, but it's allowed me to develop some great meaning and really give me some happiness, helping other people. Your suggestion on bringing up grandma or other folks that are important to us or other people around us is a beautiful way to teach kids meaning and a beautiful way to teach kids how important it can be to give back. And there's the silver lining in a way. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I hope so. And that is, I think that's one of the things in my conversations with colleagues and with other people that I respect it's so interesting to see people say, what can I bring here? And what is it that my skill set contains that I can offer? And I always joke that my skill set is bats and, how good bats are at taking off the ground. And like, what is that going to be useful for ever? But, I did talk to Anderson Cooper this week and I will be on, this special they're doing about bats. So a little bit, it did come in handy, but that's not really what I did when I was learning about bats. When I was learning about bats, I was learning about how to learn. And that served me extremely well. And so being able to look stuff up and give answers, and sometimes the best answer is the honest one. I don't know. I got an email from somebody who heard me on the radio. He said, listen, I'm old and I'm getting my car repaired and I'm terrified because what am I going to do about when I get my car back and somebody's been sitting in it while they've been fixing it? And I mean, I looked up the CDC website and I looked up the advice that it gave, and basically it said, just clean it out as well as you can, drive with your windows open for the first couple days. But we don't know, and that's a really tough one. And so that was what I told them, is nobody's really sure, but here's the best you can do, and you're probably going to be fine. It's a roll of the dice, but I can't tell you any more than that. Sometimes just knowing that the experts are saying they don't know is enough for a person. And so being able to give that to people has meant that I've had just this feeling that I'm contributing, which has helped me with my mental health through this whole thing, for sure.
Dan, I think we are, we have like 14 minutes left with this 8-week series. And it's really been amazing having you on today, because I think it wraps something up, which is that so much of your well-being comes from giving information to others, from helping others as much as you can, as much as any of us can navigate these situations. I would say the prior 7 sessions, they revolved very much around the topic of well-being. But I think a really central component of well-being is that all of our well-being relies on us supporting the well-being of people around us. That you cannot truly have well-being, even if you have positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. If the person next to you is suffering terribly, then you do not truly have well-being. And I think one of the big messages of today that I hope we're grounding for everyone is that a big part of everyone's well-being going into the future is thinking about how to be a scientist, that we're all going to need these skills. And if you were one of the people who said in the past, I am not a scientist, I don't like science, that's going to be hard going forward. And that we're not only going to need to be scientists, but we're going to need to share that knowledge with the people around us.
One of the things that fascinates too about this is, one of the things you're so wonderful at, Dan, is talking about science and making it practical too. So when you're talking about the kids, for example, talking about how you're sharing and being open with what we know and what we don't know. So I'm curious, as people here move forward with, and hopefully they have a bit of a sort of I am a scientist in my head, I'm thinking critically, I am trying to find the right sources. How do, and this is a big question, but how do we move forward in a safe way that still allows us to have that well-being? We can't not go out and play forever. Jonah asked a really interesting question talking about different populations. What's the policy? He actually asked specifically, not what will it be, but what do you think it should be? We don't have a vaccine yet for the next several years, what's the policy on socializing and meeting new people? Jonah, I'm guessing from, your picture here, you're 20 something, right? You have guitars in the background, you're clearly a cool guy, right? So maybe
I
not
don't know if I'm allowed, but I want to meet that guy.
You want to be a cool guy, one of the two, either you do, So what should it be? Because if Jonah and other folks are going to go out and want to meet new people, how do you do that in a way that's responsible, that's informed and yet doesn't say, kids, you're staying inside for the next 4 years and not playing out in the street.
Well, here's the empowering thing. There's no expert on that, right? And there's nobody that knows the answer. That's awesome. And that's where everybody gets to be a scientist, right? So it's really easy to be insecure. It's really easy to find the person that knows more than you do. And that exists no matter what you do. There's always a Nobel laureate. There's always somebody who has spent 10 more years, that has more publications than you, that has done things that you haven't done, that has traveled more than you have. There's always somebody that's done it differently from you, but that's not a reason for you not to be doing this stuff. And so one of the things you have to do to get a PhD is to get over that and to realize that if you're around people that are smarter than you, you're just where you need to be, because you're going to learn a ton. And that is a very comfortable place to go. And if you don't know the answer, that's cool. It's cool not to know the answer, as long as you're looking for the answer and you're doing the work. And so this idea of like, who is a scientist and who gets to be a scientist, I think that science is available to everyone, just like art is available to everyone, right? You don't, if somebody gives you a paintbrush and says, give it a kick, try this out, you don't say, no. People have studied this for years. I could never even begin. You try, it kind of sucks. And then you think, well, that was a kind of a nice way to spend my afternoon. I kind of like it, but I'm not sure about it. Science should be just like that. And just following your curiosity and following your passion is all you really need to do. The big secret is scientists aren't, on the whole, all that much smarter than anybody else. They're just the people that stuck with it the longest, right? They're the people that are obsessed with it. And that kid that cannot shut up about ants ends up being an ant expert. It's not because they're better at the SATs or whatever. It's because they can't shut up about ants. And that's one of the things that I've found as an academic, is that people who are following their passions become the leader in their fields. And so going forward, what do you do with this COVID-19 experience? You don't look around you at what everybody else is doing. You don't get intimidated by the fact that everyone had a COVID-19 experience, and so you don't get to pick what yours is. You say, okay, I want to establish the way I'm going to do relationships going forward. I've got a cool guitar in the background of my shot, so I know that I've got something to bring to the world. I'm going to do it this way. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to cold call that person. I'm going to give a person my phone number, or I'm going to build on a relationship I have before. I'm going to say, you know what, this is weird, but let's do a Zoom date. We've never met, but I'm dying for some personal connection. Whatever you creatively come up with is going to be the new normal for you. And there's nobody to tell you what you can and can't do. And you might as well just experiment or practice at it, if you want to use that language. And don't be afraid of mistakes. This is the advice we always give our students, but that we never want to take ourselves, is that it's okay to make mistakes. It is totally, if you're not making mistakes, whatever you're doing isn't the right thing. You've got to make mistakes. You've got to screw up. The whole rocket launch got scrubbed today because of weather, and nobody thinks that they're jerks. Everybody knows that they're doing the right thing. So you don't land everything you try, and it's okay to make mistakes. So I just hope that people feel a sense of empowerment and rebirth, and they're not, this is language, Dan, you and I have used, is it doesn't have to be a lockdown that you come out of your hole afterwards and try to rebuild what you had before. This could be a cocooning, and you might emerge as a different being altogether with different powers. Yeah.
The language that we use is so powerful around that, right? Using the lockdown versus cocoon, and the perspective that you offer, something so new can be so scary because it is everything so new about it. Yet at the same time, it's so right for us to think about things without being influenced, sort of in the way we've been influenced, the way we've been brought up. But it's so novel that we get a chance. Jonah gets a chance to think, all right, there's 100 years of research on these things. There is my experience and the people around me. It's like, Jonah, you can own this. It's like, this is like your generation's challenge, right? And so you get a chance to be able to do this. And what a cool opportunity. Daunting, challenging, but to be able to, immerse yourself that way.
And just so you know, in the 80s movie Cocoon, again, someone does die. And I feel like
don't say who.
I'm not, but I feel like
deserves better.
I feel like at this point, if you just get that out there and we just say that, I really, one other subject that we were talking about before we all came on was one of my great hopes out of this is that we will take some of this excitement over scientists, over doctors, and we will think about how to steer our country in a slightly, and maybe, can I say our world, in a slightly different way. The fact that pollution has gone down massively, and thinking about those things and thinking about, we've just experienced this. What's the next one going to be? There'll be another one. What's the next one going to be? And collectively, we all got on this call together. We've all, these last 8 calls have been given me so much enjoyment and so much knowledge and thought. And Dan, you have added to that so much. And how could we all take this and help other people with their knowledge of science and their anxieties, but also think about how we're going to work in the world in different ways?
Yeah, you know, I really want to know, I'm going to turn this around on you guys. I want to ask each of you a question. Where have you moved to as opposed to where you were when this started? So think back to when you said, we're going to do 8 weeks. We're going to do this online. I'm going to be in my living room. How have you changed as people as a result of these 8 weeks? What are the big things that you've learned from this series?
Alan, would you like to go first?
Well, it's such an easy question. I'll let you go first, Dan.
Thanks so much, Alan. How about you? You want to go first?
Yeah.
All right. So, you know, it's funny. When we kicked this thing off, we kicked it off, and I think I mentioned this to you a while ago, and a lot of folks here know, because the first class that we taught for NYU on Zoom, you know, we thought it was going to be awkward, and it wasn't. It was actually really wonderful. We asked a question, and bam, everyone got involved in the chat box. And then follow-up question, everyone was commenting, and they were saying it's so wonderful to see everyone here. You could see that they had been thirsty both for the information, but also for the community. And so we thought, what a wonderful opportunity. You know, we have people like Dan Riskin stuck in their attics. And so maybe we can actually get some time with them. We have folks like Scott Barry Kaufman, who I am honored to see on the call, who are not traveling around the world and necessarily, you know, as busy as they are. We can bring these people to this audience and bring an audience together. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges for me, well, challenges and opportunities during this pandemic is how do I help? How do I give whatever I'm able to? Now, Alan could go to the hospital, and he did, and he volunteered, and he put his expertise as an MP to wonderful, amazing use, and he's helped in many other ways too, including the show. For me, not having that area of expertise, one of the areas has been, let's create something that brings people together, that brings knowledge to people, that helps comfort them with science. What can I do next? How can I find greater well-being? And where's a community that shares this? So for me, it's an increased sense of meaning, being able to hone and get better. As you said, you want to keep going. The first week was fine. I think it was good. It was wonderful to have Dan Tomasillo. He did great, and we were thrilled. And then the next week was even better, and the next week was even better. And that first day when we wrapped, I said to the folks we work with at the Krame Center, who are wonderful, you know, I thought today was good. I cannot wait for it to get better and better, because that means we can help more and more people and be more effective that way. So it's been a number of things, but I think most richly it's been meaningful to bring this to other people and help the community, and hope they share that with others, and they share that with others, and so on and so forth.
That's great. I mean, so it's exactly what we touched on. It's this feeling that you can bring good into the world, you can contribute, and that gives you a sense that this isn't lost time, that this isn't a wasted opportunity, that you're a good citizen.
Yeah.
That's it. Kind of like Batman is a good citizen, as we can see right there.
Great citizen. Today, among the best.
Yeah, that's right. Alan?
I think,
have I delayed long enough for you to come up with an answer that you're comfortable with?
Alan was looking it up to see what that guy said.
Thank you.
He was checking his experts.
John Hearn just texted me everything to say. I think that for me, I found it a collaborative process, actually, which I found really amazing. That between the guests we had on, who are amazing, like Scott, and you, Dan, but it was actually the comments, that the chat comments that people sent in, and they made it very rich, because today was a day I was very interested in the idea of how experiences are shared and simultaneously very unique. And a big part of my life has been finding out from my patients and my friends, you know, what is their unique experience of this? And that overlap of the sharing and the uniqueness there's something very special. And I think we all experience, everybody who participated with this and shared things got to we created something. We created something, as Dan would say, with a unique voice. All of us together. That was the product of this. And I also want to thank the Krame Center for mindful living. And I like the idea that we were raising money for No Kids Hungry.
Yeah.
It's, you know, we got to do a bunch of things and spend a nice hour together. And like Dan, I am hoping everyone goes forth, has less suffering, more happiness, and is able to help people around them.
Yeah. And look, this has been an amazing 8 weeks. And I just want to echo Alan to say thank you, because without everyone here, it wouldn't have been an amazing 8 weeks. It's the people here who've contributed to and shown up and been so wonderful about things. So thank you. And, you know, summer's here. We're beginning to breathe at least a little bit, which is in a very different way right now. And so, you know, this is our final show for now. Thank you for the encouragement, everyone, by the way. You know, 8 more weeks. Thank you. And you know what? We will be back. We're going to take a moment to breathe. We're going to take a moment to go out for the summer. We're going to take a moment also to go out and think about when we come back to this, what form it looks like, the feedback we've gotten, how we can, what to bring given the state of the world, and how to bring it given what it is we've learned and how people have responded. That'll be it. So when I say it's our final show, I say for now, and we will be back. We've been talking about how to keep helping folks the very best we're able, and we're looking forward to doing that, to make challenges less daunting, opportunities more vibrant and wonderful. So in the meantime, www.happiesthour.org is still very much alive. Feel free to email us. For me, it's dan@happiesthour.org. I will forward anything you send to Alan. By all means, reach out. We would love to hear from you. If we can help, your ideas, your thoughts, anything, you just want to chat, we're there. But it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you again, Dan, for coming today.
Thank you, Dan. Such a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
It's a pleasure.
And as we always say, thanks again for joining us at the Happiest Hour Live, where no matter where you are right now, if things are wonderful, if things are challenging, every week we strive to help make life just a bit better. So have a happier week, have a happier summer, and we look forward to seeing you very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone.